Welcome to Better Than Before. This series is a collaboration with CANARI, the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute, with funding from the Open Society Foundations. We are exploring how to build back better from the COVID-19 pandemic, supporting the Caribbean's transition to socially inclusive, climate resilient, and environmentally sustainable development. I am your host, Deval Bazi, founder of the Climate Conscious podcast. Today's special guest has over 20 years of international experience in enterprise generation, business planning, project management, and team operations. She is the founder and CEO of Soca Samosa, manufacturer of fusion samosas, supplying major local supermarkets, gourmet stores, and events. Excited and motivated by creative startup ideas and new market ventures, she's also the founder of a Hawaiian tea room in Honolulu and a hardware and builders merchant in central London. She holds a BSc in Management Studies from the University of the West Indies and is trained in Dale Carnegie leadership. She is passionate about using her business platform to strengthen and promote local businesses and build better communities. Welcome to the podcast, Liza Yunis.
Thank you, Deval. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm listening to you describe me and I'm thinking, is that really me? Because I've lived such a low key life. It sounds way more impressive than my experience has been. But yes, I have undertaken a lot and I have learned a lot and I've experienced many learning curves. So I think this COVID-19 discussion is yet another learning curve that came at me. It didn't daunt me, but certainly it was a steep learning curve for sure.
Yes, it's all you. And I'm very happy to have you join me on the podcast to chat about micro, small, and medium sized enterprises and their role in achieving sustainable development in the Caribbean.
When we look at MSMEs and their contribution to employment, to GDP, to value added, to innovation, how could we not have a conversation about their contribution towards sustainable development? They have such an impact on what we do that it's really imperative that the principles and the understanding and the sustainability, we have to incorporate them into the conversation.
Absolutely. So, Lisa, as we moved past the initial crisis phase of the COVID-19 pandemic, support measures have shifted from just staying afloat to recovery and growth. It is undeniable that the pandemic has set us back in a region of small island developing states already grappling with issues such as growing debt and limited economic growth. And I guess for everyone's benefit, the UN defines small island developing states or SIDS as islands and low lying coastal countries sharing similar challenges to sustainable development. So, in addition to these economic challenges, we are also highly vulnerable to natural hazards: floods, droughts, hurricanes, coastal erosion, even volcanic eruptions that disrupt lives and livelihoods. So the medium-term economic stimulus packages have been designed by governments to help economies recover. And with this drive for recovery, the Caribbean now has the opportunity to use these COVID-19 recovery initiatives to drive transformation that supports sustainable development. But in your words, Lisa, what does sustainable development in the Caribbean mean to you?
The Caribbean wide initiatives they have attempted to roll out for better or greener management of our land and our ocean and our human resources is moving us hopefully towards greener business models and greener consumer habits. But I can't see sustainable development happening without major investment. And by major investment, I mean that at this point in time, there is still urgency of needing to provide for today and the literal tomorrow. So having a focus and having a directive that looks into the future has to come from stakeholders who make commitments, investment commitments to the future. And by the investment commitments, I mean, how do you invest into a change of mindset, not just financial investments? It's a change of mindset where we, as small businesses and the younger generations, are sensitized to the consequences of not taking certain lines of action. And that means understanding how do we get the goals of the future to carry the same weight as the goals of today. So, sustainable development in the Caribbean for me requires some intentionality. Intentionality, by that I mean by an investor's intention, a small business's intention, a consumer's intention to have a positive social and environmental impact through our choices. And that's really, in a nutshell, what it means to me.
One of the strategies that is often promoted is green and blue economies. And we've been hearing a lot about that. But what are these and how do they really contribute to sustainable and climate resilient development in the Caribbean?
To define, first of all, to be clear for our audience, that the blue economies, they encompass all industry related to the oceans and water resources. So your fisheries, your shipping, your tourism, and green economies relate to like your land resources, forestry, agriculture, tourism as well. We look at the growth rate of the population, and there has to be an acknowledgement for the pressures and the impact on those resources and how they are intensifying, and decide what are the intelligent decisions around the management of these resources. So, intelligent decisions so that they can contribute to sustainable and climate resilient future and not just benefit from decisions that we are making around other economies, for example, extractive economies. I'm going to come back again and validate the importance of the understanding, the mindset, the commitment that's required from individuals and organizations. Firstly, we have to understand that marine and terrestrial environments are more than just economies. They are part of our humanity's cultural dimension, for want of a better word, our spiritual dimension. Once we can see that we are interconnected, that opens a door for a much better understanding of the enormous losses that are being sustained, and also a better understanding of the enormous opportunities for investing and reinvesting into these ecosystems. And I think if we could prioritize that understanding, first of all, to acknowledge how valuable these economies are to us as individuals, that we don't exist in silos outside of them. Perhaps then we can begin to harmonize ecosystem dependent economic values and harmonize them with traditional economic activity.
And you mentioned the issue of value. And it has me thinking that value is not just economic. It's something that we need to drive home. We need to get everyone to understand that value is not just economic, especially when we're talking about natural resources. I mean, it's easy to categorize certain resources in terms of dollars and cents, for example, oil and gas. But value is also derived in clean air, clean water, in the spiritual value that we get from interacting with these natural resources.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, how do you develop a relationship with your environment if you yourself are siloed? I have seen for myself the difference between having a Zoom meeting with stakeholders and taking stakeholders out into the environment with the small businesses within their surroundings, and the difference in the outcomes from those conversations. And I think that has to be one of the ways, strategies forward where a stakeholder has to touch, feel, incorporate his senses into his decision making. It can't just be, a cognitive process.
Yes. And if we're changing the way we look at value, we also have to change our economic models. Traditional models tend to be linear. You extract or you take a resource, you process it, and you produce something. And now we're seeing, as we're also talking about green and blue economies, we're also talking about circular economies, where there's the better management of resources as opposed to everything just translating into waste. You're finding ways to keep the cycle going and be more efficient in the use of those resources.
And that's a wonderful thing, I think. It's wonderful to see the innovation happening. It's a reflection that there is a change in mindset, that it is being prioritized by sectors of our policymaking and our governance. So I'm hopeful. And I'm hopeful that more of us can get onto that dialogue and, just adopt that mindset, adopt that understanding, adopt the commitment on a day-to-day basis rather than, just be keyboard warriors and hashtaggers, that it reflects in our own individual decision making as well.
So, as someone who has done a lot and seen a lot, Lisa, how do MSMEs support this type of development that we're discussing, green and blue economies, circular economies?
I think as a business owner, you have to sit and decide. You look at your economics, you look at your environmental impact, you look at your social impact, and you say, how do I move from being an enterprise to being a social and an environmental enterprise as well? What can I do with the resources I have to make a difference in these three areas? And the three areas are, so you look at yourself and you say, what is my contribution towards social inequity? What is my contribution to job creation, to fair and equal wages? And that requires some reflection. When you sit down to look at how do you impact on um, gender inequality as a business? How do you raise the profile of other female-owned businesses? How do you address businesses that are being started by young people? So there are a wide range of areas that you could look at. And you don't have to pick all. You don't have to tick every box, but you need to start somewhere and say, what is my responsibility? What can I do with the resources I have? And for myself, for Soca Samosa, we found reusable packaging. Whether anybody reuses it or not is out of my hand, but I can try to encourage it and I can think of ways to encourage it. So that's on me to find ways to encourage it. We do interviews with other female-owned businesses to raise the profile of women entrepreneurs and the success of women entrepreneurs. I also employ only women and I make sure that they know that they're valued. I think there's always room for me to grow and to improve in the environmental and the social impact of my business. But the key word there is impact and being able to sit down and document and to recognize and to share with your customer base, with your community, the impact that you have. I think once you can demonstrate that message, it adds to the integrity of your business. And when you build your business integrity, it translates into trust with your customers that extends to your product, to your service, to the authenticity of who you are. In working with CANARI, I've come across case studies across the Caribbean where an organization, so I'll take, for example, I can use a local one, which is like Nature Seekers. And Nature Seekers is up in Matura, and they have multiple arms to their work. One being turtle education research, the other one, they have a craft program, they have a reforestation program, and then they have a for-profit water sports center and community restaurant. First things first, I see them focusing their efforts on being and remaining financially sustainable. I can't take away from how critical it is to be financially sustainable, because without that narrative, everything else will fall to the wayside. They have also created jobs for the community, and they have potential to add additional jobs when resources are available. They hire OJTs, they have strong conservation efforts. So you're seeing them ticking boxes and the acknowledgement that they have to tick those boxes in order to live the vision that they have set out for themselves. And there are so many instances of these businesses throughout the Caribbean who are creating an impact within their communities in such a powerful way that improves the quality of the lives within their community. I know from speaking to people within the sector that makes investments, and I know many of them, the financial profits are marginal, and therefore it falls under the radar for many of them. But it doesn't mean that they don't acknowledge its importance. We just now have to find a way of marrying the impact with the importance and looking at it as a collective rather than individual.
So I think no longer are consumers only concerned about the product and the service that you provide. They're also concerned about impacts.
And the sustainability effort has to be a win-win for it to make sense. So when I look at doing reusable packaging, it's not just I'm doing it for an environmental impact. The packaging looks good. It makes my product look good. It makes my business look good. When I showcase another female SME, her customer base is my customer base. So I get something out of it as well. When I use local farmers for my supplies rather than purchasing imports, it's a win for me as well. It's a win for them. It's a win for me. I showcase the farmers to my customer base to encourage them to also buy from these local suppliers. My customers see me purchasing local, and that is incentive for them to also purchase local, meaning me. I'm a local manufacturer. So I would say to anyone who wants to start incorporating this triple P narrative into the way that they operate their business, there are so many gains to get from it. It's not just, or we're being noble. There's so many gains to get from it yourself.
So Liza, we're talking about building back better following the COVID-19 pandemic. And from your experience, in what ways did COVID-19 affect sustainable development in the Caribbean?
But COVID-19, I'm confident in saying that we were not ready for the changes that came with that. It took us, and I do mean us, including me, into survival mode. And keeping our head above water meant prioritizing financial sustainability. And in many cases, even this, wasn't possible for some businesses. Being financially sustainable meant sacrifices. And by sacrifices, I meant we saw people going without jobs. We saw people being, temporarily let go. So their own financial sustainability was impacted. Um, we saw ourselves cutting corners in terms of paying fairly for items because we needed to maximize on profit margins. I think that we saw ourselves extending our ability to deliver beyond what is practically capable. So that in itself was not sustainable because it was exhausting and it was really digging deep just to survive. And it taxed our well being. And by well being, I mean physical well being, financial well being, mental well being, emotional well being, in a way that we are still recovering from. So we talk about recovery, financial, economic recovery, whole other dialogue of recovery that still needs to be had. So, in terms of sustainable development, that really took a back burner. in the initial part when we were in sort of like a panic phase. I think coming out of being innovative in our survival mechanisms, we found ways to actually incorporate more local, well, for myself at least, more local ingredients, expand my product line, how to make my product more exciting, more enticing, how to get my product out there. And in getting my product out there was creation of jobs in another way, not just through employees, but through like delivery services. And that evolution of development of my business would not have happened without COVID-19. So in a sense, you say that which very nearly breaks us is that which makes us. I have found myself, and certainly from my own business, and I imagine that there are businesses out there who have walked the same path as I have, that became more sustainable as a result of that journey. Not initially, but as a result of that journey, we did.
Well, Lisa, strength has to be tested, right? Resilience has to be tested. And COVID-19 definitely was a test of our strength and our resilience for all of us.
Yeah, you're saying that, and I hope I'm never called resilient ever again in life. I feel like I've lived all the resilience I could live that I want to live. I look forward to the creativity and the sustainable development rather than living in a survival mode. I really do look forward to that now, that stage of my business.
You mentioned recovery and the different forms of recovery, because I think we automatically think about economic recovery. But this series is about expanding our view of recovery from not just the economic. So, can you expand a little bit in terms of the different aspects of recovery as you have seen?
When I review the recovery mechanisms that came into place naturally out of COVID-19, outside of desperation for economic recovery, I saw a creativity around establishing new networks and innovation within existing networks, all towards a greater good. A greater good in terms of like an overall well-being of the individuals, of the community. So there was like a free trade environment for the borrowing of ideas, for the borrowing of motivation, for creating win-win collaborations within your community, with your customer base, with influencers, being able to access your market through new avenues, and then a challenge to be bigger than your business product or your business services so that you could get your community on board. And your customers, your suppliers, your followers, people who align themselves with your business started to place that value, that ecosystem dependent economic value to your business. And they started to naturally measure the impact that we had. So those networks were creating a feel good environment in which we were encouraged to thrive. And I mean, I don't know if maybe that might have happened outside of COVID, but it certainly was a rapid progression state of being for all of us because we needed it. It wasn't a question of if we wanted it, we needed it to stay whole.
Yes. And the pandemic showed us that we all need each other. I think that was one of the big takeaways from the whole experience. So, in light of your experience of over 20 years, how can we in the region leverage these COVID-19 recovery initiatives for creating sustainable and climate resilient development in the Caribbean?
I think we have to create a platform that facilitates collaborations, real collaborations, not academic ones, between those that have the understanding of blue-green economy and the benefits of sustainable development, and those that have the influence and the power to make investments. I don't know if the urgency is there right now to create those collaborations. I think there's an interest. Definitely, I can see that there's an interest, but I don't think the urgency is there yet. So when those collaborations happen, I think we're going to start to see new financial products, new forms of capacity building support for small businesses in recognition of the fact that those with the capital get it. They understand the significance of what they're doing. Right now, I don't think, they're there yet.
I think it's important to demonstrate that it is feasible, and given that there's growing interest in these type of enterprises, even from investors, you're hearing a lot of discussion now about ESG, environmental, social, and governance. There is a space for these type of business models, and we definitely need to, have that exchange of information and expertise to kind of create that ecosystem that breeds these type of entities. So how can MSMEs be empowered to play a greater role in building back better post-COVID?
The main thing would be for them to be recognized as a stakeholder in decision making and in the influence of a strong economy. And strong, I mean strong in all three senses. Many times they're overlooked. They might be celebrated, but they're not incorporated into the decision making. I think a second thing would be to give like proper status, recognition, and reward to social enterprises so that they could be held up as agents of change. And as you mentioned before, be an illustration for other organizations on how their efforts convey to success. And then we get to redefine what success means because we have the examples in front of us. So I would like to see that social enterprises being celebrated and given recognition. I don't want to circumvent the issue that we have serious concerns on the horizon. This is not just about how do we stay comfortable in our homes. This is about how do we survive. And I don't think, everybody's come onto that page yet. I'm talking to you looking from the comfort of my home to hundreds of families that are submerged underwater right now because our infrastructure cannot handle the climate change, the consequences of the climate change that's happening right now. So we could talk about economic recovery, we could talk about supporting local, we could talk about, social and environmental initiatives. But if your first need in that hierarchy of needs is not met as a result of the decision making that's happening, then we haven't realized how close we are to not recovering. And not just not recovering from COVID-19 pandemic, but not recovering from the decisions that we have made at all. And it's a very scary situation that we're in right now. I think small businesses need to have access to appropriate finance with support mechanisms to help build their financial literacy and their competence for us to have a fighting chance at using that sector of our economy to build back. And that conversation has to happen in tandem with how we execute our policies. I'm seeing that we have lots of policies that advocate for climate resilience, advocate for COVID-19 recovery, advocate for sustainable development, but we're not seeing the execution.
Yeah, it's a big task. I believe that we can rise to it. So, Liza, we've been discussing building back better, and building back better is about reimagining development. It's about making good investments with our future in mind. So, as we focus on building back better, what's one recommendation you would like to see implemented to support the development and strengthening of local small and micro enterprises in the Caribbean?
I would say that you see building that financial literacy and competence that I believe that is key to strengthening SMEs in the Caribbean. We have a population, we have individuals who are highly skilled, very talented, motivated, but that is not enough. That's not enough to create a successful venture. They need to understand how to make themselves financially sustainable. And when we tick that box of becoming literate in understanding how to make money, how to use that money for profit sharing, that those concepts, how to purchase responsibly, how to sell responsibly, I think that will give a platform for SMEs in the Caribbean to evolve into saying, if I'm doing this part of my business well, I more and most certainly can do the other parts, being environmentally responsible and socially responsible well.
Thank you, Lisa, for sharing your thoughts and insights. And from our discussion today, you have clearly showed us that micro, small, and medium-sized businesses have a critical role to play in transforming our region for sustainability and building resilient communities.
Deval, thank you very much for the opportunity for me to speak from my heart. I think it's very important as a stakeholder in my capacity, as small as I am, to be authentic about my experience, both good and bad. And I hope that, in my sharing, there's a little bit of learning, but more importantly, that I encourage people to become curious about what they can do.
Thank you so much for listening to the Better Than Before series. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. For more info, or if you'd like to share your questions and ideas directly with us, please connect with CANARI and the Climate Conscious Podcast on any of our social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and my personal favorite, LinkedIn. See show notes for direct links to our websites. The Better Than Before series is a production of the Climate Conscious Podcast in collaboration with CANARI, funded by the Open Society Foundations. This series is edited and produced by Bradford Media, with artwork by Carrie Lee Dixon. Join us on the next episode.